Welcome to the special meeting of Owen Sound City Council. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for coming in off such a beautiful afternoon to be here and be part of this. Could I have the warrant, please?
Certainly. The Mayor has requested a special meeting of Council to begin today at 4 p.m. for the purpose of discussing Owen Sound Transit, and it has been signed by a majority of Council.
Thank you. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest, please? Seeing none, a resolution moving Council into Committee of the Whole.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Chamberlain that City Council now go into Committee of the Whole to consider a deputation, minutes, and a report.
Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. We're now in Committee of the Whole. We do have one deputation, and before we get right into the deputations, I just wanted to say a couple of things, if I may, with Council's indulgence. And aside from welcoming everyone, I wanted to provide some thank yous that are in order, and thank yous to the Accessibility Advisory Committee and the Operations Advisory Committee, as well as staff and transit riders, first student staff, and Dennis Fletcher from Steer, Davies, and Gleaves. Before I ask Dennis to provide us with the assessment and the overview for today, I just want to ask everyone if you could just carefully listen to one another today, and this is for Council. If you listen to one another today and stay focused on the decisions. The decisions in front of Council today are the following: types of buses, the quantity to be supplied by first student, confirmation or rejection of the 4-route system, direction on the transfer point shelter, the GPS system or not. It's important to note that the large buses, regardless, will take approximately 1 year to arrive from the point of order. Smaller buses, or the RBOC style, take approximately 6 months. If Council has any additional direction for staff or for the consultant today, I would just advise that you put forward a motion, and once we recognize the motion, we'll have discussion, and then we will, of course, follow with a vote. In order to provide the best possible transit service for the citizens and the overriding responsibility to be financially responsible and prudent, the discussion and consultation with the community has been extremely extensive and detailed and frequent. This commitment to community consultation and really listening to transit riders has resulted in a tremendous amount of time and information and a much better understanding of transit as it affects the lives of many of our residents. In 2009, Owen Sound received $2.3 million in financial support from the OMPF, or from the province. This year we received $961,000. It's a significant difference. Council provided direction, this Council provided direction to staff during the 2012 budget deliberations to examine services to find efficiencies, to deal with overall operational budget constraints and the ongoing capital shortfall that we face. Transit certainly has had an enormous amount of attention, and rightly so. The frustration we are all feeling is that tension that's caused between making the best decision for an efficient transit system and one that is affordable for this community. So nothing less is what we must achieve. So let's get to Dennis, and let's get some decisions made. And I want to acknowledge as well that Councillor Body is unable to be here today as a result of a personal family matter. Dennis, if you could step up to the podium and provide us with your assessment and overview of the system. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to sort of continue off, or continue from where we left off back in June. I know Council has, as part of their agenda package, a little over 300 pages of history to provide the whole picture. We'll pick it up with the 4-route option. You'll recall that in May and June, when we presented the results of our assessment of the 3 route options, it was decided that the trade-off between coverage and the cost savings was just a little bit too great, and that there really wasn't the level of service to be provided with a 3-route system that the community was expecting. So we were asked to go back and reevaluate a 4-route system, also addressing some of the shortfalls that we saw in the existing 4 routes. So this presentation tonight picks up with that, provides our assessment of the 4-route option, with some changes from the existing routes, and provides a little bit more detail that I hope can provide you with the information that you need. Just to go back a bit, my first slide here just shows a map of the existing routing with an assessment of some of the features that we found from our assessment, and that's first of all that there's a very good coverage from the system. Whether it's one-way service or two-way service, the routes do provide very good coverage. A typical target for walking distance is up to about 400 meters, and a large portion of the community here is within a shorter walk than that, somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 to 300 meters. So very good coverage. On the other hand, there are a number of running time issues. There's often delays. There are some traffic bottlenecks. The mall driveway area is always highlighted as one. And certainly the intersection of 10th and 3rd, right at the terminal, particularly in the summer, and also in the winter. It seems like there's always a reason to get stuck at the corner of 10th and 3rd, and with the buses being right there, that's often a problem as well. The other issue not mentioned here on the slide is the current state of the buses. We haven't put a lot of stock in that issue, simply because you're in the process of selecting new buses. So that problem should take care of itself. But one of the limitations that we see in the current system is there really is no flexibility for expansion or growth of the system. The other feature, of course, that you're dealing with is a very challenging geography. Even though the walk distances are shorter, they are sometimes much more difficult, either uphill or downhill. And the final bullet there says that the green and blue are significant barriers between all of the green space, the parks, and the sound itself. It's a fairly significant barrier to east-west travel in the city, and there are some important gaps in the network that have a fairly significant impact on the transit service. The second slide here shows just some of the speed issues, and again, we have a map of the existing service highlighted with a table of some of the features of the routes. The routes vary from the shortest route is Core at about 10.4 kilometers up to the longest route, which is East Bayshore at about almost 14 kilometers, and we try to achieve routes for a half-hour cycle. We try to achieve the trip in about 26 or 27 minutes. And that gives a little bit of extra time for delays along the route. If there are no delays, it gives the driver an opportunity to step out of the bus, take a break, do whatever is necessary, and literally just get out of their seat every once in a while. So the table here shows 2 columns. One is which the speed that the bus has to drive in order to accomplish the trip in 27 minutes, and the speed that it might drive in order to accomplish the trip in 30. So you can see that, and the table indicates that the East Bayshore route, in order to achieve a 27-minute trip, has to travel almost 31 kilometers an hour. And typically, we don't like to see speeds over 25. On an average speed, and that accounts for all the stops and traffic signals and passenger stops and turns and everything else. And a rule of thumb that we typically use is about 25 kilometers an hour. The other 3 routes, the table shows, are slightly below 25, but the East Bayshore is above that at almost 31 kilometers an hour. So that was one of the routes that we targeted. And that it's in being too long and also responsible for a number of the delays. The third slide here shows, again, a map of the existing system, and it's highlighting the low ridership areas. So each of the routes is highlighted in a similar color, indicating the areas where ridership on the route is low, based on the current counts. And there's a couple of important features out of here. One of which, the map shows that the Brook route has no particular areas of low ridership, and it's a route that is fairly consistent throughout. It does have some points of high ridership. Those are the 14th Street stop between 2nd and 4th, and up at 28th Street are fairly significant pockets of ridership. But there are no particular areas on the Brook route where ridership is low. The other routes all have some areas that are low. On the core route, particularly on 2nd Avenue and on 4th Avenue, and the area north of between 10th Street and 16th. The Crosstown route has a few low ridership areas, particularly along 4th to the south. And one of the problems that we've got is that there is a fairly high ridership zone to the south that's worth going down for, and that's necessary to make the trip down there. And again, the configuration of the park and the cemetery requires a long loop around in order to get back into to the 6th Street area. And the East Bayshore route shows a number of areas, particularly along 3rd Avenue.
Dennis?
Yes.
Excuse me for one moment. Can you just hold that thought, Peter?
Well, was a slight error. The Brook route, the big pickup in the Brook route is on 14th Street is actually a core pickup. It's not a Brook route pickup. The apartment building gets on the core. It doesn't get on the Brook.
That's correct.
There we go.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
correct.
I just
you.
want to, I want to make sure everything's accurate, because
Thank you.
somebody may not
That's great.
understand that.
Thank you.
And I think most people will recognize, looking at 3rd Avenue, the density along there. There are some important generators. The recreation center, a number of different areas, but the residential density is really quite low, so it's not surprising that is, and in some places there are no houses, it's just the hillside. So that's certainly not surprising. And the other area is 16th Avenue East, again, where it's there's not really any residential development in the area. When we look to route design, we looked at a number of constraints and opportunities, and just reviewing the points on the slide here for each of the four routes. The Brook route we determined really could not be significantly altered to reduce its distance. It's kind of locked into going up to 28th Street, and there's some minor tweaks that we could do to miss a turn here or miss a turn there, but they're not significant in any way in terms of travel time savings. What we did identify was the opportunity to serve the 14th Street stop with the Brook route, and we looked at that in each of the alternatives, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The same with the Crosstown route. Again, there really isn't the opportunity to change the route to reduce its distance. There's no option to shorten the route down to the south to 1st Avenue without going all the way down and coming all the way back up. We did look at the opportunity to take service out of or the option, I should say, of taking service out of the 7th Avenue loop where the bus detours down in and around, but again, that's a fairly high ridership area for the Crosstown route, so that didn't seem like a viable option either. When we looked at the core route, we noticed that it's primarily a destination route. It doesn't serve a lot of residential area in the same way that the other three routes do. It's also the shortest route. So there's we saw some opportunity there to reconfigure the route. And the East Bayshore route, which is, as we mentioned, too long for to be served reliably. It's one of the chief culprits in the regular operational delays outside of the breakdowns. So we were looking for opportunities to shorten it as well. And since the core route was short and the East Bay Shore route is too long, one of the opportunities that we saw was to swap portions of the route to try and balance those a little bit more. One of the options that we looked at, I know it was suggested in the HDR report. It also came up in one of the public sessions that we had in May. Was to look at formal pairings of the service, of routes in the service. If you're not a regular rider, you may not be aware that the routes all what we call interline. The buses operate from one route to another. So it goes from, when a bus is out on the street, it goes from Core to East Bay Shore to Crosstown to Brook. Did I get that in the right order? Something like that. And each bus does a circuit on the four routes. This has some advantages. It has some advantages for the driver. It has some advantages for passengers if it happens to be pairing the route that you want. There is a bit of a limitation in it though as well. If you look at the map, it appears that the East Bay Shore route kind of operates in a loop, and if you come from 3rd Avenue, you come into the terminal, and then you go out back up 2nd, I should say, and that's not actually the case. That's not what the bus does, because the bus doesn't operate on the route through the terminal. When it comes into the terminal off of 3rd Avenue, it becomes another route. So if you live on 3rd Avenue and you're wanting to get to other portions of the route, despite what the map appears to show, you actually have to transfer at the terminal to do that. So we looked at a slightly different pairing arrangement. We looked at each of the possible pairs for the 6 different combinations to pair the 4 routes. I won't go through all of the details, but the 2 that we came up with, and this is not inconsistent with the HDR report, was to pair Brook and Core, as well as to pair East Bay Shore and Crosstown. And that gives us the chance to balance the times a little bit better. It's the right mix of residential and origin and destination types of locations along the route. I should say, though, however, this is not really this isn't a sacred element of the plan. The routes could still operate independently. They could still operate the way they do today in the chain of 4, or they could be paired this way as well. That's really kind of an operational decision that you might make, and you might change from time to time, just based on current performance. So the first option that we looked at was one where we tried to maintain the existing coverage and really not do the minimum possible with the routes. The map shows our option 1, which leaves, just to describe the routes a little bit, option 1 shows Brook as unchanged from its current. The Crosstown route is unchanged from its current. The East Bay Shore and the Core route are just altered slightly. The Brook route, the Core route to operate in a loop via 10th and then clockwise around 9th Avenue East, 16th Avenue East, through the shopping center, the hospital, and back along 8th and 10th Street into the Central Core, and then the Bayshore route operating over essentially some of its existing routing with just some changes in how it gets in and out of the downtown via second and third, but still serving the mall and the hospital. So the problem with this routing, though, as alluded to in the first, is that it really didn't solve any of the problems. Where there was a minor increase in the length of the Core route and a minor reduction in the route length of East Bayshore, but not enough, we felt, to address the service reliability issues. So we rejected this option. The second option was to do a little bit more to balance the routes, and again, we made the principal changes to the Core route and the East Bayshore route, with one important change to the East Bayshore, or to the Brook route, I'm sorry. So the crosstown route, the blue route, remains essentially as it is today, but all of these options, of course, reflect serving a central transfer point at 3rd Avenue and 8th Street, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Not going to the terminal. In this option, we've taken the core route out of the west side and focus it on serving the east side. And the one primary destination, as Councillor Lemon pointed out, for the core route on the west side is the 14th Street stop between 2nd and 4th Avenue at the townhouses and apartment complex there. And we address that issue by turning the Brook route from a single one-way loop into kind of a figure-8 loop. So it covers the same streets that it does now. We did make a minor change. The map here shows the route going up 2nd Avenue. In our final recommendation, you'll see it moves back over to 1st Avenue East. But north on 1st Avenue to 14th. And then instead of continuing north on 3rd Avenue the way it would do the loop north of 14th Street in the opposite direction. So rather than doing that loop counterclockwise, it would loop clockwise, and it would go across 14th Street in order to do that. Then when it comes back down from the north, it's now on 3rd Avenue West, and again it would cross 14th Street again and do the loop to the south and back in. Using Alpha Street and back along 10th Avenue West. So what this allows us to do is actually provide a stop on the Brook route at the 14th Street stop twice on each route. So if you're coming out of the downtown, you have a direct ride to the 14th Street stop. You have a slightly longer ride to the 28th Street stop, which is the other key focus of the route. It takes a couple of minutes longer to get there. If you're inbound towards downtown, again, you have a shorter ride now from 28th Street, and again, you have a direct ride from the 14th Street stop into downtown, where you can transfer to the other routes, or if downtown is your destination. So that's it's a small but very important change to the Brook route, and what this allowed us to do is to take the core route out of that west side. What we did then in option 2 was to basically split the core and East Bayshore routes, so their service areas, a little bit more equitably between the two routes. So the East Bayshore route in this option becomes a much more open loop. We show it here operating counterclockwise, eastbound on 8th Street East through the hospital, north into the plaza, back along 16th Avenue. We don't show a diversion into the mall, but that could be a possibility as long as that diversion is only to Sears and not to the front door. Then north on 9th Avenue East to 28th Street East, and back down south on 3rd Avenue East and into the downtown. So we take it out of the central East Bayshore area, and we serve the original routing in there with a reconfigured version of the core route, which would operate in a clockwise direction out of the downtown, north on 3rd Avenue East and over to 6th, where East Bayshore goes now. Serve the residential developments in the center of the community, east on 20th Street East, then south on 16th, and further east then again on 10th Street, south on 8th Avenue, and back into the downtown. We do not show the core in this option going to the plaza, Winners and Walmart, or into the hospital. This gave us certainly a better balance of running times. It serves all major stops, although not to the same degree as the existing routing. So only the East Bayshore route in this option goes to the hospital. The East Bayshore route goes to the mall. Nominally, the core route goes to the mall. If walking isn't a particular issue for you, you certainly can reach the mall from the intersection of 16th and 16th. it is certainly, though, not the same walk that it is today. So a little less service to the mall, and a little less service to the hospital. And the trade-off there is that we have a better balance of running times and better service reliability. When we looked at that, there was a number of improvements that we saw that we were able to do, and we took a version. The slide now shows our option 2A, and we're describing it as the modified version because we reviewed this one with the Accessibility Advisory Committee as well as the Operations Committee, and we have incorporated some of their changes into this option. So the preliminary option was just a little bit different than this one. On this one, you'll see, again, the crosstown route is essentially unchanged. The Brook route is the same as what we have shown in the first one. The first option, it's operating in that figure-8 fashion across 14th Street twice on the way up, once on the way out and once on the way back. On this map, though, we have shown it operating north from the downtown on First Avenue West as far as 14th Street to cover off the clinics and other important destinations on First Avenue West. And again, in response to comments that were received, the other big change that we've made is reversing the core route and the East Bayshore route, partly for operational considerations, and if you examine the routing closely in the first option, you'll see we had it making a turn that we can't make without bumping over a median. So we made some operational changes. We made some changes in response to comments from the two committees. So here are the two routes. The East Bayshore route is essentially the same, just operating now in a clockwise direction. So out of downtown, it goes north on 3rd to 28th Street, and then back south on 9th Avenue East on 16th Street into the plaza, then south to the hospital off of 16th, and returning to downtown via 8th Street. And the core route we modified to now operate. It's actually a little bit more of a figure-8 routing as well. So it would operate out of the downtown east on 10th Street East, north on 16th, west on 20th Street East into the East Bayshore neighborhood, and then south on 6th Avenue East and 15th Street East. Use the small portion of 8th Avenue East to come in past the rec center on the east side of the rec center, and then returning from 10th Street East over to 8th Avenue, then 8th Avenue and 8th Street East back into downtown. So that solves our operational problems. It gets us better service to the recreational center. Doing the East Bayshore route this way leaves the stop on the north side of 8th Street East in front of the high school and the college, whereas looping the other way, it was on the south side of the street. So if you were trying to get to or from the college or the high school, you would have had to cross 8th Street to do that. This maintains the service on the north side of the street. There are, as I mentioned, a few small modifications we might still be able to make to this at the detailed operational level when we're working on the implementation. And one is to divert the East Bayshore service into the mall parking lot to a Sears, an entrance at the end of Sears. Operating this way in the eastbound direction on 16th makes that a little bit more difficult than the other option because we're turning left in, but I think it might still be able to be done. It may also be possible once we get to the detailed operational level and just see where stops are, that we may be able to divert the core route in to go west on 16th and through the mall parking lot and back out onto 16th Avenue East to go north up to 20th. So that's something we'll look at the detailed operational level. We are showing these routes configured for a central terminal point on 3rd Avenue East, north of 8th Street southbound. If in fact the transfer point ends up at a slightly different location, we would have to reconfigure the downtown routings just slightly, and it may involve going around a block either west of 2nd Avenue or going around the block east of 2nd Avenue, depending on which way you're trying to get to. So, and again, that's kind of a detail that we'll look at once we're trying to determine the specifics of the new stop locations. Just with respect to some of the vehicle requirements, we did look at a number of the counts that First Student provided to us for counts they conducted between December and May of 2014. They count about 24 daily trips. The routes are counted to ensure that there is one weekday and one Saturday count per route per month. So there's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday count for each month. When we looked at these counts throughout the 4-month period, the maximum number of boardings that we have the table here on the slide shows the maximum boardings, which is 27 for both Brook and Core. So that means on any one trip, the maximum number of people that got on the bus was 27. For East Bay Shore, it was 28. And that's fairly consistent with the previous numbers that we had seen that showed East Bay Shore as the highest route and Brook and Core just running a short second behind, and then a lower ridership level for Crosstown, which in these numbers shows as a maximum of 18. We also use these numbers because we have the numbers of ons and offs at each stop. We can calculate how many people are on the bus at any one time. And the maximum number that we saw on any of the routes, again, the busiest route, East Bay Shore, was 23, and the Brook route was 20. The Core and the Crosstown route were both a little smaller than that. You'll see the biggest difference in between the number of boardings and the maximum passengers on board is on the Core route, which has boardings of 27 and a maximum of 17, whereas the others are much closer. What that tells us is that there's actually a lot more ons and offs with the Core route, whereas the Brook route and the East Bay Shore route have people traveling slightly longer distances, and they stay on the bus longer. And that kind of fits with the residential nature of those routes as well, versus the Core route where people are on and off, because it's primarily destinations, the 10th Avenue destinations. The 10th Street, I should say, the recreation center, the mall, the hospital, et cetera. So there's a lot more turnover. With these numbers, what recommended was that because we see these numbers in the 20s, East Bay Shore 23, there's always a little bit of discrepancy in some of the counts. We can't be absolutely certain that 23 is the maximum. It might be 1 or 2 higher on any given day. That led us to recommend that there could be the need for a couple of higher capacity vehicles, 2 with 25. Based on the options that you're looking for, the recommendation here is that you could use 2 vehicles with a 20 passenger capacity and 2 vehicles with 25 passenger capacity, and you would never really have a loading issue. We were also told that we're looking at replacing the specialized transit vehicles, and in order to protect the option to use the specialized transit vehicles or a spare vehicle, both either as a specialized or as a fixed route bus, our recommendation is that it's important that you make sure that those vehicles are both AODA and D409 compliant, which means for the fixed route service it meets the requirements of AODA, and for the specialized transit requirements it meets the requirements of D409. Typically, if you were buying a dedicated specialized transit bus, it would only meet the requirements of D409. And with that requirement, then you would not be able to use it as a replacement bus on the fixed route service because it wouldn't be AODA compliant. It's a minor change, mostly aftermarket types of features that you would need to add to it, stanchion-mounted buttons for call signals, that kind of thing. And it's nothing too onerous, but it's important. Because if your vehicle's not AODA compliant, you won't be able to use it as a replacement. Your Worship, is the presentation that I had. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, and I'll go right to Councillor Lemon.
The first question is on your last slide where you're saying the 4 vehicles, the 2 large and 2 smaller. We currently have 5 operational vehicles in regular transit use, so one
Yes.
can be in for maintenance and repair. But your recommendation doesn't say that. So I would assume what happened to the other bus? Are we getting rid of a bus, and are we not going to have a replacement bus?
Well, I just add the caveat, Your Worship, that this was a little bit of an add-on to our assessment. We weren't actually asked as part of our mandate to do a complete assessment of the vehicle, the capacity and the vehicle requirements, only to understand the implication of the changes of the routing on the vehicle requirements. So we were going on the understanding that the city is planning to buy 6 vehicles, and 4 of those would be used in regular service. 1 would be used in regular service for the specialized transit, and 1 would be a spare. The 6th vehicle would be a spare that could be used either for specialized or for the fixed route service.
That would be
So-
first student purchasing the
Well,
buses.
yes, on your behalf.
Yeah.
You just caused the city treasurer to get a little nervous.
So it was the generic you. I'll point to Jane whenever I say you now.
The generic you and the royal we, right? Yeah,
So-
that's right.
So again, we did not get into the detailed operations of how First swaps out spares. I think it's safe to say right now that this is not typical operation, what you see now, with the number of the unreliability of the current vehicles and the number of breakdowns that you have. And we're quite confident that the new vehicles will replace that. So it's something you need to consider. Really, though, this question comes down to a question of the level of service that you want to provide. We see numbers with and we did some counts for Transit Tuesday as well, and we counted again the East Bay Shore and the core routes because they're the 2 of the busiest ones. Certainly the East Bay Shore. We saw 2 trips over 20 on the day. So they would have had standing passengers or passengers required to stand on the vehicles you have now. And certainly on the 2 of the smaller vehicles, they could have been accommodated on the R box, but it would have been a little bit crowded. The larger 25 capacity vehicles, if you have 22, 23 people on a 25 passenger bus, you're going to have people standing. If you have 25 seats, when you hit 15, 16 passengers, people, if they're capable of standing, will start to stand. Because I don't want to sit beside you, you don't want to sit beside me, until the bus gets crowded. And you know how this works from yourself. If you have a choice of a seat, you're going to leave a seat between you and the other person. If you're traveling by yourself, transit passengers sit that way too. So every other seat fills up first. And then once there's only single seats in between, some people choose to stand, other people choose to sit. So if you see a bus driving by with 1 or 2 people standing on it, chances are there's still only 16 or 17 people on that bus. But once the bus really starts to fill up, and people who are traveling longer or are not capable of standing for the distance they have to travel will of course choose to sit down. So like I say, it really comes down to the question of the level of service that you want to provide to your customers. Standing is not at all unusual for short distances in a transit environment, but it's also important to understand that not everybody can stand. And that you need to be able to provide the seating capacity for those that need to sit, and then to some degree you want to be able to provide the seating capacity for those who want to sit.
I'm going to go, Councillor Purdon has a question for you as well.
With the chart here, and the maximum boardings and passengers. Would the recommended route, the option 2A, for example, does actually change some of the places where people are getting on and off buses? Would that have any influence at all on the distribution of passengers on these different routes?
Through you, Your Worship, it's likely that it would. I don't know that it's going to change the overall maximum. It may change it by 1 or 2. It's certainly likely to change it could likely change the pattern of where it would happen, and perhaps for how long those riders are on. But we're not, we're not, especially with Brook and Crosstown, we're not really changing those routes much. We are adding a higher density stop onto the Brook route. So I would expect the Brook numbers to go up a little bit with the addition of the 14th Avenue or the 14th Street stop. But again, inbound and outbound, that's about 3 or 4 stops away from the core. So it's going to be a fairly short trip. And I'm not saying in that someone who gets on at 14th Street will have to stand and we believe are capable of standing into the downtown. But if someone gets up and gives them their seat, they do it for a very short period of time, either into downtown or out of downtown, because the distance is so short. That's the one area I think we can probably clearly point to where there'd be a small change, and that's on the Brook.
Okay. Councillor Chamberlain.
Yes, it's certainly been a pleasure to have somebody with your background working with us on this project.
I hope I've
And
helped.
I know that from the very beginning, we've always said we want to make it better, and we want it to, and so I understand from your recommendation of 2A that you think this is a better route for all of us. The reliability of every 30 minutes seemed to be the thing that most people wanted, to be able to say the bus will be back here again in 30 minutes, and they would get where they wanted to go. You did say, when you were just going through this, that if we weren't using the transfer point that is routed on here, that there would have to be some tweaking, but that those routes could relatively be used the same way? Is that what I heard you say, or did you want to speak to that?
Through you, Your Worship, I did say that. And of course, it would depend on where the relocation was to. But certainly if it's right in the downtown area. One of the things we tried to do was to stay as much as possible away from 10th Street and from the 10th and 3rd intersection. One of the options we kind of got out of it completely. You do see in the preferred option that we've certainly eliminated any service on 10th Street between 2nd and 2nd. Well, actually between 1st and 2nd, first west and 2nd east, where a lot of the delay can occur. We have the East Bay Shore route operating through that intersection, and in the recommended configuration, it's only the core route that has to turn through that intersection, and they're making a right turn at that intersection. So we really think that's kind of the best option. If we move to a different location, I think there's still enough, if it's a block here or a block there, there's still the flexibility to do that.
Thank you. Councillor McMenamin.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I would echo. Thank you, Your Worship. I would echo Councillor Chamberlain. I think you've brought a lot of clarity to this situation, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Question, based on your answers to Councillor Purdon on passengers on board, why are you recommending 2 vehicles at 25? Or did I miss?
I think. No, I didn't. I didn't mention that through Your Worship. I think that. We see numbers here. These are nominally 8-year vehicles. They're going to have to last you certainly the life of the contract anyway. And they are tested for 8 years of 8 years of service. I think, Jane, is that right? 8 years of service. So I think it's worth considering having a little bit of flexibility to accommodate higher levels of ridership over the next 8 years. We did look for opportunities in the same light to to try and reduce the service, shorten the service a little bit to accommodate future expansion, particularly to the west, which was an issue that we heard out to the retail strip. I think there's still, apart from my answer to Councillor Chamberlain about accommodating some changes for the downtown routing, there's still very little flexibility in this system in terms of the routing. But I think you could consider providing some flexibility for additional ridership, particularly since we see the peak of the ridership between 10 and 2. And if you want to put in measures around, marketing and other kind of non-service measures that make it attractive more to the commuter, it's that in the short term, that's a really easy and good thing to do because you've got lots of capacity between 6 and 9 and 4 and 6:30. But ultimately, you may want to be able to protect for additional growth over that, and that would be a good thing.
Any further questions? Councillor Adair.
Thank you. I do want to echo, you've done a tremendous amount of work. Two issues, just getting back to what Councillor Chamberlain had said about the location that you have shown here as the central terminal point. You had said that you wanted to keep that away from 10th and 3rd because the traffic congestion in that area is what's causing many of the delays in the system. Would that be?
It's one of the it's one of the areas, and we don't have a lot of data to support that. Only the anecdotes that we've heard from riders, from the terminal manager, from First, from our own bit of experience. I was here the last time. It took me 10 minutes to go from second to second. So, and it was nothing going on. So in the winter it's an issue because of the conditions. It's the summer. In the summer it's an issue because of the tourists who you want to all get on transit anyway. So if there was an opportunity to stay away from that, we wanted to take it. It's not a deal breaker in the routing though.
Okay. My second question was, I'm intrigued with the idea of the pairing of the routes. The one that you showed, it would mean that someone could get on at 28th Street and basically stay on the same bus until they got to the mall. Is that?
Yes, Brook and Core would be together as one route.
And then when you're finished at the mall, you get on the bus, and
Right.
that same bus would take you back to
Take you back to Brook.
I find that a very intriguing idea by taking where people are coming from and where they want to go, and you're essentially on the same bus. You do not need to transfer or get off the bus at all.
That's right.
Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you very much. My question's sort of along the same line. I understand 3rd Avenue and 10th Street, north and south, on any night at, I call it rush hour in Owen Sound, but it's between 4:30 and 5:30. It's pretty tough, and in the summertime with the traffic, and especially on a rainy day, it's tough to go north and south. But when I look at your map, your option 2A, I see that all 4 routes come down 8th Street, and they come down from 8th Street, and they all make a turn there and continue on. It looks to me like one block to 9th Street is where they're continuing on, and that the core route, or the crosstown route and the Brook route, they make left-hand turns on 9th Street, if I'm reading this right, and the other 2 go straight forth. One goes straight through and one makes a right-hand turn up the hill. The traffic goes north-south. It doesn't really go east-west. So if all of the route, if we decided as a council that we wanted to keep the bus station where it is, it seems to me that it could very easily be twigged to go east-west. I mean north-south, not east-west. I'm confused here. The traffic goes east and west, that on 10th Street, that's where it's going. Mm-hmm. But if it looks to me like all you need to do is don't make any turns on on 10th Street to get around 10th Street, but take the buses just exactly the way you have them and just take them another block. That seems to me to be a pretty easy twig.
It would be. Your Worship, my answer to Councillor Chamberlain was that the routes could be reconfigured to an alternate location depending on where that location was. And if it's a block or two, it wouldn't be particularly an issue. If we hypothetically selected the terminal as an alternate location, there obviously would be, from our option 2A, no impact on the East Bay Shore route because it's driving right by the terminal location anyway. It would require a very small diversion in this plan to the core route, which is currently operating from 8th to 10th on 3rd, and it could just continue the couple hundred meters north and come back. We might look, part of the reason for that routing is to serve 8th Street East, but also to get into the downtown in the proper location, so that that might present different opportunities, not necessarily constraints. For the crosstown route, it would actually, the biggest impact would be on the crosstown route, because it would have to go from 9th Street up to north of 10th Street and then come all the way back. From the option 2A, there would be the same impact on the Brook route, but option 2A is not what the Brook route is doing today. So it would actually, compared to the existing, it would not be a significant change to. Well, obviously, it wouldn't necessarily have to be any change for the Brook route, but we may in fact look at still using some option via 9th Avenue just to avoid 10th.
Okay, thank you very much.
Got Councillor Purdon and then Councillor Lemon.
I just need a little bit of help with the option 2A, with the, I think you did mention it, but if you could just help me understand the way the routes are laid out here for both the East Bay Shore and the core route. They're going clockwise. So if there was a transfer station on 3rd Avenue, those buses would be going along on the east side of the street, and the transfer station is on the west side of the street. So how, because the bus is traveling north, so
Right.
how would that work in terms of people using a transfer station and trying to get on a bus on the other side of the street?
So the routing is intended to show, and again, we've when we reversed the East Bayshore route to operate from clockwise to counterclockwise, this was done just last week as a result of the Operations and Accessibility Committee. So that's why we just included the caveat that we would have to look at the details of the routing in the downtown. We basically wanted to say that we would wait until the outcome of this meeting to finally determine the specific routing around the block. It's intended to show, or I shouldn't say it's intended to show, our intent is to have those buses for a transfer station on 3rd Avenue between 8th and 9th to be all operating southbound on 2nd Avenue from 8th to 9th. So specifically, from 9th to 8th. So specifically, the routing as we've shown it for the East Bayshore doesn't do that. But we would have to, if that's where council decides to put the transfer station, we will work with city staff to identify an appropriate looping, and with county staff, in fact, to identify an appropriate looping to have the East Bayshore route operating as it is there, but around the block, either on 4th or 2nd, to be able to come southbound on 3rd. And the same with the core route, which we're also right now showing northbound. it would be reconfigured to go around the block as well.
Do you have any concerns that that would increase the time by adding that turnaround for both of those routes?
It's going to add about 150 meters plus 2 turns. We would make sure that they are right turns, not lefts, to go around that way. So it's going to add another minute or so to it. So if time is that tight, that may be at the expense of the diversion into the mall for the East Bay Shore route. With the core route, I think there's the flexibility to do that without any concerns.
Councillor Lemon?
Yeah, a couple of questions. First of all, I found it very interesting that when we were talking about the problems on 10th Street, it's very rarely a problem crossing 10th Street. It's a problem when you're, for instance, because I ride the system quite regularly. When you're coming out of the terminal, the only real problem is the buses that try to go to the west side, because they're having to turn into a very busy lane. But for the buses to go across 10th Street is not an issue. But the other thing is, and it came to me this afternoon as I was going over the material, we've got a huge emphasis now on the 8th Street. We're going to have 3 of the 4 routes traveling down the 8th Street Hill or up the 8th Street Hill. And we're planning to reconstruct that hill, like I think next year. And so we're going to have to do some really strategic planning here because, boy, oh boy, that's going to be one heck of a mess.
We'll cross that bridge. when
Well,
we
no,
come to
but we
it.
have to think of it
Yes,
as
we
we,
do.
Your Worship, I have the floor.
You do.
This is one of the things that we will have to consider very carefully as we make changes, to recognize that when that hill's under construction, there's not going to be a route up for the buses. So that's going to mean either 6th or 10th Street. So there's another conundrum in our transit system that we have to look ahead to. And when we're making our decisions, we also have to give that credence as well. And that is one of the things that I think is very important. The other thing was the subject of terminals come up. And to me, the current cost of the terminal, which is $90,000 to $100,000 a year, depending on which set of math you want to use, a lot of those costs would disappear if we did some adaptive reuse of that building. As one example, I understand the DIA's contract on the spot they're leasing now expires in September of this year. And that might be a very, very good marriage, or possibly some other business in there that could sell the bus passes as other people do for a small profit, and see if we can use adaptive reuse to cut probably $60,000, $70,000 of the cost of operating the terminal out of the budget, which would be a godsend because of provincial downloading. So I think we have to go outside the box, but I think we also have to remember 8th Street reconstruction is going to go ahead, and the thoughts of routing everything, I don't know how you do it. I really don't. It's going to be a mess.
Councillor Lemon, I think that you're right on the mark when it comes to the foreshadowing that the 8th Street reconstruction is going to create some headaches. There's no question. Yeah. Some significant headaches, but there's 2 seasons in Canada. There's construction and there's winter, and we will tackle that well in advance. I think it speaks probably to a greater issue and the need for a transportation advisory committee. That's something that may yet be discussed. Are there any more questions for Mr. Fletcher? No more questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Fletcher. We really appreciate I believe the word clarity was used, which I have to say I appreciate. Thank you. We do have two sets, excerpts from some minutes of the Operations Advisory Committee prior to hearing Mr. Tupling and Mr. Ritchie's report, and I was wanting council's direction. The first one is an excerpt which you have attached on, it's attachment 18 on report 5B1. And that's basically the decision of the Operations Advisory Committee, and highlighting that here for council's information. So the clerk, motion to receive is in order?
Your worship, this motion was received previously. It is here now for a substantive decision on which route.
So it's an information piece.
Note, this is,
Okay.
we,
Okay. So this is a preamble. This is going to be really covered off more in detail in Mr. Tupling's report, as well as the second item on the actual type of buses and the statistics around the ridership and so on. So I'll invite, we'll set those just aside at the moment, and we'll invite Mr. Tupling to review his report with us, please.
In our report, I want to start out by acknowledging that the help of the clerk's department, that matter that you just dealt with was a suggestion that I asked to be included because I wanted to make sure that council had all of the information in front of them as they deliberated this matter. And I do want to acknowledge the help of the clerk's department in putting this together, this being my sort of first opportunity at making a presentation to council, so I very much appreciate that. The other thing I want to do is to say that you summarized very eloquently what we are looking to and what staff is seeking direction on from council today. So I'm going to hit on some of that stuff again, and then quickly run through it. And I'm also going to let Mr. Ritchie do the presentation on the financial part of it, as that's his area of expertise. So what we're asking council to give us today is confirmation on a 4-route system. And again, that was a recommendation that came out of the Operations Advisory Committee. And then we're looking for direction to staff with respect to the number and size of the buses that are to be supplied by the operator. Approval of the conceptual design of the proposed bus shelter at the transfer point and 3rd Avenue East north of 8th Street. And that would be if that is the decision that council decides to go with. And the last item is the inclusion of a GPS system on the transit buses. I don't have another slide that deals with the GPS system, so if I may, I'd like to just speak to that very briefly now. In the interim, this past week, since the reports were published and since today's meeting, I've had opportunity to talk to our IT, to talk to the city's IT staff, and also with First Student. The recommendation that we would suggest council consider at this point is that the buses be wired, if you will, for a GPS system in the future. There are 2 options for GPS systems as I have come to understand them. One is the First Student system, which they use and would have to be adapted for uses that the city might want to make of that information that would be gathered and collected. And the second is to install equipment that would be provided by a third party. From our discussions with First Student, either could be done. The key is to getting the wires, getting the equipment wired at the right time. There's some questions that have to be considered around that. One is, what information does the city want from the GPS system? How far do they want to take that information? And then most importantly, of course, what's going to be the annual operating cost of running that system, and what will be the capital cost to put it in. So those are numbers that we don't have now, but I think if we set it up that it can be installed at a later point in time, that's something certainly that we can get the cooperation from First Student on as we move forward with this.
Excuse me, I'm going to go to Councillor Lemon for a question.
Yeah, my question is, in an earlier meeting, I thought we were told that First Student had GPSs on all their buses.
Your worship, to Councillor Lemon, they do have, and they have that capability of putting GPS on all of that's on their buses now. What we're looking at is the possibility of another system that is more suited to the information the city would like to get from that GPS system, and of course it would have to tie in with information that First Student would like to get from its buses as the operator. So there's two ways of going about it, and our suggestion is that at this point we need more information before we can come back to council. But as long as we get the buses wired for it so that it doesn't complicate the installation later on, I think that is the appropriate action for council to take.
I would therefore move that we request the provider to have the buses wired for GPS systems when the contracts are let.
I'll recognize that motion. Further discussion? All those, discussion? No? All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Carry on. Oh, Councillor Purdon had a question, excuse me.
This is a technical question. The transit system in Orillia that's also operated by First Student also makes use of Google Maps. It's a free service offered by Google where riders can basically use their smartphone to see when the next bus comes. Is that integrated with the GPS system? Is that part of the same, or is that something different? Because that's a really great service as well.
Your Worship, to Councillor Purdon, that's the possibility. There are people who are much more technologically inclined to answer that kind of question. Your IT department can offer information, but that is the kind of information that would be available, and that's the kind of research that needs to be done to decide which system is best for the city to go to. The second direction that we're asking council for is to provide us with some direction on the size and number of buses that they want to purchase. And this table simply shows a comparison of the existing and possible bus options based on the ridership information that Mr. Fletcher presented earlier. We've compared the current city buses to the 30-foot Easy Riders, the Eldorado Passport HDs, and the R-Box. Capacities range from 26 down to 20. Each of the buses has 2 wheelchair positions. The number of seats that are taken out, if you will, when there's 2 wheelchairs on the bus varies. And but the standing capacity is also somewhat different. The Eldorado Passport HD has a standing capacity of 16 compared to 11 for the 2 Easy Riders, but the Easy Riders have more seats. The RBOC, the standing capacity in the RBOC buses is limited. So this is just a summary of the capacity that is an issue that council will be deliberating. So what I wanted to do is to simply then show some pictures. This is a photograph of the existing bus. This is the bus that we're talking about when we refer to the RBOC bus. The next one is a picture of the Eldorado Passport HD. And the next is a picture of the Eldorado Easy Rider bus. So as we go forward, we're going to talk about them as the RBOC, the HD Passport, and the Easy Rider. And just to refresh, then that's the Easy Rider, that's the Passport HD, and that's the Arbok bus.
Councillor Lemon.
Yeah, a point of clarification on the, I believe it's the larger of the Easy Rider, the 26-seat capacity, or 26. Does it have 2 doors? And forget about emergency exit doors. Those I'm not counting. Do they have 2 side doors, or do they have 1 side door?
And you're referring, Councillor Lemon, through you, Your Worship, to
Easy Rider.
to the Easy Rider 2, which is this one here. And I'm going to defer that question to the representatives from First Student, but I think the answer is yes. They have 2 doors on, one for passengers coming on, and ideally 1 for passengers coming on and 1 for passengers exiting the bus.
Much like a conventional. Now, the RDOC nor the Eldorado Passport HD have two doors.
That
They
is,
only have the 1 door.
Your Worship, to Councillor Lemon, that is correct. They only have the 1 door.
Okay, and, okay, because like the first bus is fairly easy. The smaller bus is the Arbok, to me, I think is slightly more attractive in terms of usage.
Your Worship, to Councillor Lemon, the door, the normal exit door for this particular bus is on the other side.
Yeah,
This is the-
I
this
sort
is
of
the picture,
figured that, 'cause
yeah,
it was going to be a
so,
heck of a
yeah.
jump
Right.
from the emergency exit door. The other question I've got is from the, and I'm going on memory here, but the Arbok has the ramp up into it rather than steps.
Yes, Your Worship, to Councillor Lemon, the photograph that's on the screen shows the ramp, and in fact shows the wheelchair coming off.
And the reason I'm suggesting this is that then that bus could be used for specialized as well as conventional, provided it meets both of the standards required. And at this point, I'm going to make a motion, see what happens, that we obtain 2 30-foot Easy Rider Eldorado low floors, and we would need 3 Arboks because we normally have a spare. You have a 4-bus system, but you have to have 5 buses in order to operate it. So I would make a motion to go to 2 of the large buses and 3 of the smaller Arbok buses.
I recognize the motion. However, my understanding is, and we may want to go to our First Student representatives, we need 6 buses.
Yes, Your Worship, that is correct. The contract calls for them to supply 6 buses. There will be 4 for regular transit, 1 for specialized transit, and 1 bus as a spare.
We do have
I'll
a,
increase that number, then I wasn't realizing we were going to include specialized at this point. So make that number 4 and 2.
so the motion is to direct First Student to acquire 4 of the Arbok and 2 of the Easy Rider Eldorados.
Names get more complex.
Discussion to the motion, Councillor Adair.
Could we get the cost on those before we decide? Well, we actually.
We might want to hear the report, but this is the motion that's on the floor right now. So you can table the motion till after the report.
I'd just like to hear the report as part of the discussion. And I do have a question. If we were to get 6 of the Arboks, if we got 6 of the Arboks, we could use those on the core routes and specialized. They would go back and forth. They'd be fine for both routes all the time.
Your worship, to Councillor Adair, yes, that's correct. If there were 6 RBOCs, 4 of them would be used on the regular transit, 1 on specialized transit, and 1 would be a spare, and they would be alternated as the operator saw fit to do so.
Councillor McManaman?
Motion to table the earlier motion until we actually hear the report.
Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We'll just table that until after your report, Jim.
And at that stage, your worship, I'm going to let Mr. Ritchie take over the presentation and let him talk about the financial components of this and explain the basis for the tables and how they were set up.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. Certainly, I'd like to thank Mr. Tupling and Brian from First Student for assisting us compiling these numbers together as they came forward options. As Council is aware, what we're doing now is pricing the various service levels that you may determine. We've done our best to look at the options as we thought they would be presented. Referring back to the net budget for transit for 2014, which is $621,905. So the first option we looked at was 4 conventional transit buses, 1 specialized, these all being RBOC buses. So 6 RBOCs, based on the assumptions we have made, would cost the city $743,573 to operate in 2015, an increase for budgetary purposes of $121,668 in the 2015 budget. The next option we looked at were 2 of the Easy Riders, 2 of the Passports, and 2 of the RBOCs, and that level of service would cost us, again, based on the assumptions we have made, $891,672, an increase of $269,000 and change over our 2014 budget. And the third option we looked at was 4 Easy Riders and 2 RBOCs. And that cost, as you can see, based on all the assumptions we have made, would be $978,502, an increase over the 2014 budget of $356,597. Our assumptions on everything except the actual cost of the buses, that level of service, are the same on each comparison. So that is the difference in the level of service that Council is looking at based on the options as we saw them last week.
Thank you. Councillor Lemon?
Okay, when we put this out to contract, my understanding was from reading the contract, it did not specify the small buses. It was to operate the system. And I believe in the actual agreement, the final decision rests with the city. And now I'm wondering, were we measuring apples and apples when we were comparing contracts then? Were both bidding on small buses, or were they both bidding on large buses, or was one on small and one on large? I'm concerned.
Mr. Tupling?
Your Worship, if I may, I can't speak to what happened in the past. I did review the report that was submitted, and there was nothing specific in the report that dealt with the size of buses, and that's the only comment that I can make, as that predated my time here.
Well, this becomes an issue. We had 2 people who had qualified contracts, one of which was higher than the other, and I wanted to make sure that if we're all of a sudden going to have this increase because we get the buses which we need, because they did not specify in their bid for a student, I do not believe that there was going to be all the small buses. I don't believe that was ever mentioned until after the contract was awarded.
Perhaps, Your Worship, Mr. Robinson could give us an opinion.
I've also reviewed the material, and there was nothing specified in the contract about the size of bus.
Or in the request for proposal?
The request for proposals discusses the parties talking about it, and in one paragraph indicates that, in one amendment, indicates that the proposals were intended to have information about the proposed buses at the outset, but that was not in the proposal, in the RFP that was accepted.
So, we had an RFP that went out that said, we're looking for transit service, and we want the provider of that transit system to also provide the vehicles without any specifications around the type of vehicle. So now we're here making the decision. Well, Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Just a question. When I'm looking at these costs in 2014, there are 4 conventional transit routes to March 31st and et cetera, and that, I am assuming, with the terminal was $621,905, but that didn't, we owned the buses. That did not buy the buses. We still own the buses there. So when you go down to 2015, the contract jumps 269,000, but that's because we're not buying buses. First Student is buying the buses, is that right?
If I could, Your Worship, the 2014 budget, quite frankly, was a bit of a hybrid. If you recall, Council, we had, I believe, budgeted for 3 months of a 4-route service, or sorry, 3 months of a 4-route, yes, 3 months of a 4-route service, 9 months of a 3-route service, with the terminal open part of the year as well, closed part of the year. Certainly, the very good public input we have changed the 2014 operations from what we had budgeted. So, in fairness, perhaps comparing budgets to budgets, they're really not accurate at this point, because the 2014 budget was a hybrid of a service.
Right.
We are very confident, having worked with Mr. Tupling and First Student, that the prices we are putting forward here, the costs, based on the estimates we've made, will be very close to what they are if council selects one of those levels of service.
But the figure that we're looking at in 2015, although it's an increase over 2014, we are purchasing new buses. We're not purchasing new buses, but our contract would include new buses at no cost to the city, other than the cost of the contract.
That's correct, Your Worship.
And how much do we have in our reserve for buses?
Just around $1 million.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Councillor Dare.
Well, just for clarification, Your Worship, the third item on here, which was 3 routes without the terminal for 2014, there'd be no budgetary increase. What's creating the budgetary increase is that we're going to 4 routes. That's still presupposing no terminal, but going away from the 3 routes, which don't work, back to 4 adds $121,000 to the system.
That's correct, Your Worship.
With all the same size of bus. So, with all the RBUC buses. So any changes from 4 routes with the RBUC and no terminal simply adds to the $121,000 of additional over budget of what we had proposed. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay.
Further discussion? Any more questions? Councillor Lemon?
Yeah, these are the prices that First Student is giving us. These aren't necessarily the price. This budget line for operating the 4 conventional buses, if we went to all RBOC, that's the number that First Student gave us.
That's correct, Your Worship.
We haven't negotiated that. We haven't questioned it.
That is correct.
And I'm just amazed at the dramatic increase that's there of 140,000 to go to 2 larger buses. Because, yes, there will be slightly more fuel. The cost of the bus is written off by the corporation because of allowing under the Income Tax Act. So why is there such a huge increase?
If I could, Your Worship, fuel really, excuse me, we're paying for the fuel. The city's buying the fuel. It will be the amortized cost of the buses, and I'm not familiar with the price that First Student gets on the buses. I do recall those large buses were significantly more expensive to buy than the R-Box. I don't know the exact dollars, and that will be what's reflected in these costs.
And what they're saying the cost.
That's correct.
Any further discussion or questions for Mr. Toppling? Or Mr. Ritchie? Oh, Councillor Purdon.
It's difficult just to deal with the one without the other. One of the other clear voices that we heard from the public was wanting to retain the terminal, which also it would incur a cost. And we talked about it earlier when Mr. Fletcher was providing the information on the routes if we changed it. I just find it difficult to consider when we're trying to make decisions, to make a decision about one without thinking about the other and what's going to provide the best service, and in the long run, not just a service piece, but also in terms of best use of that property as well, the terminal. Because I could look at this chart and say, well, that would influence me about what type of bus, if it also included a terminal. So I find it difficult also with the motion from Councillor Lemon that we're going to be looking only at buses without looking at the whole transit system and the needs of the community that have been brought forward. I just point that out in terms of the discussion and for people to consider when we're looking at the one piece, because I think there's been clear communication from the community that the terminal is very important. And we have all kinds of developing things, like the county's doing a study now on a regional transportation system. We have the Greyhound transit station parked up at a gas station, which is really not good. And other ideas, as Councillor Levin put forward, about using, trying to do some kind of a partnership with the city to make a better use of that building and cost share the building that would allow us to keep it as a transit system, so a transit center. So I think we need to be mindful of the last time when we made these decisions, we did it piecemeal. We talked about the terminal first, and then we talked about the routes, and in the end, everybody was upset. Like, it didn't seem that we were making the decisions that best met the needs of our current transit users, but also any future transit users. And I just don't want to do that a second time around.
Sure. Further discussion? No more questions for Mr. Toppling? Councillor Twaddle. Yeah, you can finish your report.
Yeah. Thank you, Your Worship. Maybe in response to Councillor Purdon's comments, if we look at the chart that's up there, the last year when we were the last year numbers that we have for operating 4 routes, the existing configuration is $754,000. That was up $120,000 from 2012. And that was there was a projected increase beyond the 754,000 to something close to 1.2 million. That's what those staggeringly increasing costs were, what really prompted where we are today in terms of trying to maintain a functional transit system that best serves the needs of the people who use the transit system, but that is also financially responsible and sustainable. So we go from 635,000 to 754,000 in 2013. These are real numbers. The 621,000 for 2014 is a budget number. It's not a real number. The 2014 number is probably going to be closer to 750,000. You go into 2015, we're looking at 750,000. So that's, if my math is correct, that's a 20% increase from 635,000 to 754,000 is in round figures a 20% increase in costs. So that's the one budget issue we're faced with. In 2015, if we go with 4 conventional transit buses, 1 spare, all RBOCs, we're at 743,000. So arguably virtually the same amount as in 2013. No, well, yeah, and 14, but I'm going back to the real numbers. If we add 2 of the larger buses, based on the numbers that are in front of us, that is at an additional cost over the 8-year life of the buses of $1 million. So the decision here today to pick 2 RBOCs and 2 Easy Riders is a $1 million decision. The decision on the transit terminal that was made, it must be close to a year ago now, which was to eliminate the transit terminal. That decision was made and approved by a majority of council. Was designed to save $90,000 to $100,000 a year in operating costs. So if we add that to the $1 million over 8 years of two smaller and 2 larger buses, we're now talking at almost a $2 million decision. In fact, it will be a $2 million decision when we start putting the inflation factors into the contract over the next 8 years. So that's really what we're dealing with here today, is a $2 million decision, and I think that's something that we all have to understand. I can't support that. I cannot. I'm committed to operating a reliable, effective transit system to meet the needs of the people who need it, but I'm also committed to doing that in a financially responsible way. I was a firm believer in the 3-route system. I truly believed that would work. But I approached it with an open mind, and when it became apparent that the 3-route system wouldn't work and wouldn't meet the needs of the people on transit, I didn't continue to blindly support it. I agreed that decision needed to change. And in fact, it was my motion that changed it. But we're talking about we're talking about 2 decisions today that amount to very close to $2 million. Now, 2 weeks ago, this council decided not to build a thermophilic digester as part of the wastewater treatment plant upgrade because we didn't have $2 million to spend on that. We made a responsible decision. We're facing an annual $2.5 million deficit in our commitment to our linear infrastructure, just our linear infrastructure and our asset management plan that we've got to deal with. We've got another almost $1 million in downloading from the province that we have to deal with over the next. Who knows? There's been a change in the government. It could be next year. Could all be in 1 year. Not likely, but maybe over 2 or 3 years. So the light at the end of the tunnel isn't a nice new shiny transit bus pulling into the terminal. It's a train. And I think that there needs to be a true recognition of that. When I look at the ridership numbers that are provided in the report, The capacity of the R box substantially exceeds the average ridership on any route at any time. There are occasional times when the capacity is stressed, but those are occasional times. And I don't believe that it's a financially responsible decision to spend $1 million in order to deal with an occasional situation. We do not build storm sewers to deal with 100-year storms. We deal with storm sewers to deal with more realistic levels, even though we all know we're going to face 100-year storms. There are other options to deal with capacity issues on an occasional basis that haven't been explored, but I believe they are there. So I can't support going back to the terminal. I can't support 2 larger sized buses. Not because I wouldn't like to see all that, not because I wouldn't like to see that for the riders, but because we're all facing the same incredible financial challenges. And we as a city have to get a realistic grip on what's coming to face us in the next few years. Thank you.
I'll go back to Mr. Tupling to finish off your report.
Thank you, Your Worship, and with the comments from all of the members of council, I can move through it fairly quickly. Just a quick comment on the estimates about what is included and was not included. No anticipated level of change in the level of gas tax funding, same ridership, increase in fares as was approved for 2015. Those estimates that you saw did not include the transit terminal, but rather a transfer point on 3rd Avenue north of 8th Street. And so just the next step then is to move into, and the next thing that we've asked for council to consider is if the decision is to not continue to use the terminal as a component of the transit system, would be the construction of a transfer point. And what we've done here, and I want to acknowledge the help of the engineering staff that did this drawing for us. It shows how 4 buses could park along the 3rd Avenue, the 3rd Avenue right-of-way there. This is in the southbound direction, so we recognize that those issues that Dennis talked about will have to be addressed. There would be a shelter that would be constructed on the 6 parking spaces that face out onto 3rd Avenue. It would be an accessible walkway to get from the shelter onto the sidewalk. We've looked at a standard that was published as a guideline with respect to transit stops for accessibility. They're not yet in a standard and may not be in a standard, but certainly any future design of that shelter and that transfer point would be designed to meet those standards. The location of that is shown. It's just shown here. Typically, where that accessible access would be. Would want to move it around a hydro box that's there and a sign and a tree so that there's minimal disturbance to that. So then the next photograph, and again, this is a sketch of what the shelter would look like, completely enclosed. It would be proposed that there be efficient lighting in the LED lighting, and some heaters, radiant type heaters that would only operate when there are people in the shelter. And I would be recommending that they be put on a breaker that they could be shut off so they're not on in the summertime. This then is a photograph, and in dealing with one supplier, He was kind enough to, he was up and visiting in the area, he took a picture of what we were proposing, and then he superimposed what the shelter might look like sitting in that actual location. Now, this is just putting it on the parking lot as it is there now. There has to be a concrete pad to anchor it to, so that's all work that would need to be done. But that's really, that's the conceptual design for the shelter that that would be proposed at on 3rd Avenue if the decision by council is to discontinue use of the terminal as a part of the transit system. The next item, just a quick summary of how I arrived at the costs to construct that shelter. And then the next item are the estimated operating costs for that shelter. I've tried to reflect that high priority winter maintenance, that shelter has to be ready for service at 6 a.m. every morning or 6:30 a.m. We want to make sure that it's kept clean. I've tried to make an allowance for the electricity costs that would be incurred. I believe those calculations are based on actual sizes, on information that I received from a supplier, and then miscellaneous maintenance costs brings it to that estimated $15,600 per year.
Councillor Lemon.
How many parking spaces would be lost?
There would be a total of 10 spaces lost. There'd be the four parking spaces out on the street that would be lost. There are 2 here. There'll be 2 here, and there'll be 6 spaces that will be taken out of service in that parking space there.
Well, I thought there were more on the street. The buses, unless we're getting really short buses, just from the number of meters that are there, I thought there were about 5 or 6 meters just on the street there.
Your Worship, to Councillor Lemon, I stand to be corrected, but there are, because I initially thought that as well, and when I went back and checked, no, there are fewer there than there are fewer in that, particularly right in there. There are only, as I recall, there's only 2 meters. It might be 4. It might be 4. I stand to be corrected. I apologize for that, but it's not very. It's either 2 or 4. I'm thinking it's just 2.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it is.
Okay, and the other thing is, we asked the DIA to contribute for taking parking out of the revenue stream. Are we allocating money to go into the parking costs for the parking we're taking away?
Your Worship, to Councillor Lemon, that has not been done in this calculation. We know that the average revenue, and Mr. Ritchie provided this information, the average revenue for parking meter or parking space is approximately $500 per year, but that would be an average space, and unfortunately we don't have any specific data on these spaces to know what the actual revenues from those spaces are.
Further discussion?
Just one other question. The snow removal is going to have to be done more than once a day when we get snowfalls in order to meet accessibility. There are other criteria as well, as you're aware. I really feel that the costs are going to be greater than we think. And I think there are alternatives that have not been explored on the terminal. And adaptive reuse is one of the buzzwords of this century. And we have a chance for adaptive reuse, and that might be better than putting the buses on the street in that location. I have concerns about traffic movements, et cetera, as well.
Carry on.
The last item that we wanted to talk about is where we go from here, and sort of a timeline for doing that. First and foremost would be to start working with the city solicitor and First Student to amend the contract and finalize those negotiations. Work with the consultant to establish the location and number of bus stops based on the routes that are proposed and based on the selection that council is going to make. If the decision is to eliminate the terminal and go to a shelter, then we look at issuing an RFP for the supply and installation of the shelter, selecting an engineering consultant to prepare a drawing and specifications for the site work that would need to be done, and that would include the electrical work. Call tenders for the work that's described above, and then calling tenders for the installation and signage of shelters on the new bus routes, and then based on the projected in-service date for the transfer point shelter, establish a date when the new four-route transit service will be implemented. And then, of course, there's the whole communication package that is going to be so vital around this whenever the switch is made. Now, what we did include here, and this slide is a little bit difficult to see. This was focused, and it was going to put some pressure on to get a negotiated contract back to council for the August 11th meeting, but that isn't going to happen now. So that would come back on August. That will come back on August the 25th. That's the key. And depending on the decisions that are made today, and having regard for the city's purchasing bylaw, it's going to be this schedule is going to get extended out. As it stood here, it was optimistic. We were optimistically projecting that we might be able to have all of this in place by December the 1st, but with a 1-month delay, I think that is way too optimistic. And one of the other things we would then be seeking some direction from council, or in the alternative, we can bring back some more information based on your decisions today as to what the schedule would be for implementation, and we present some options for you to consider at the August 25th meeting. So, Your Worship and members of council, that's my presentation, and if there are further questions, Mr. Ritchie and I will attempt to answer them.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be some more questions. If you'd like to take your seat up there, it might be more comfortable as well. Councillor Purdon.
I am aware of the cost impact of these changes. I'm also aware that we're building for the future, and the decisions that we make today are going to be with us for quite some time. I think there is a capital fund available that's been used, that's been put in place for the purchase of new buses that we've talked about at council in the past to help with some of the ongoing expenses. This is just a question of Mr. Ritchie perhaps, whether that capital fund could be used in a strategic way to help offset some of the cost implications for the purchase, for the new lease agreement that we're going to have for a 4-route system and more buses, or as we're talking about the size of buses, perhaps larger buses and smaller buses, if that could be used in some way to offset some of the operating costs, because we don't own buses any longer. So that's my question.
Through you, Your Worship, what we tried to do in our financial comparison was leave the city in the same position when this contract is completed 8 years from now as it is today under all the options. So that if you're comparing levels of service and cost on an annual basis, the city would still have 8 years from now $1 million roughly in reserve as it does today. That's what's reflected. As council is aware, when we first started into this process a number of years ago, we were under the anticipation that we would be replacing our own buses. That's why we set up the reserve. Council will recall in our transit budgets over the last number of years, there's been a contribution to reserve of $150,000 roughly, so that in 10 years' time we would have this money to buy our own buses. So that's what it reflects. 8 years from now, we'd be in the same position today as we are no matter which option you took. Having said that, if you take an option we could look at ways to use some of that reserve to reduce our operating costs. However, it's one-time money, and certainly council will remember my constant, perhaps nagging that one-time money can be used one time. So 8 years from now, if everything was the same in transit and council was looking at a new contract, you would have no money at that time then to assist you, and the council of that day would be faced with the same dilemma, except perhaps even worse, because you'd have no options. So yes, there are things we could do. I would always hesitate to use all of those funds to offset the cost for the next 8 years, or who's ever sitting at this table at that time would be certainly in a worse position than we are today. But I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for. Something we could do. I would certainly never commit all of them. I wouldn't advise council to commit all the $1 million to it.
That was exactly the answer I was looking for. And I certainly understand the notion of having the reserves in place was to purchase the new buses. We're not purchasing new buses. We're increasing our annual operating costs by having our provider provide the bus. So the question was about the $1 million, whether that could be used. I suppose 8 years down the line, the city may want to buy their own buses, and then they won't have a $1 million reserve sitting there, waiting to make that decision.
That's exactly right, except 8 years down the line, our $1 million will also be gone, and at that time, we wouldn't have anything to offset whatever those increased costs are. So it's a bit of a, it's a mathematics game, I guess, at that point, so.
Okay. Councillor Chamberlain.
Yes, well, I like the idea of what Councillor Purdon wanted to look at the whole thing in a holistic way. But I do think that we can make some decisions quite easily today. We can make the decision on the 4-route service, and we can make the decision on the buses. I wouldn't like to put everything together in the one motion. And I think we've got probably have a motion on the table. We could maybe start that process. So if we could I know I like to look at them all together too, but because of the cost implications, but I do think there's some things we will take apart. That's my.
Any further discussion? Councillor Wright.
So are we dealing with the motion that has been tabled? Are we lifting it off the table? That's my question.
We can certainly lift it off the table because Mr. Tupling and Mr. Ritchie's report is finished.
Then I just want to speak to that motion, and I'm not talking about the terminal at this point or anything else.
Councillor Lemon's motion.
Okay, Councillor Lemon's motion. I think sometimes when you have to make hard decisions like this, that you have to make a compromise. And so I myself, I feel that that I do have to make a compromise, and not speaking about the terminal right now, I have reasons that I want to keep the terminal, and that's something I'll talk about later. But I understand that we can't have everything. A luxury would be the big buses and the terminal and everything else going, which we just don't have. So I think that from my perspective, I can't support the motion with the 2 larger buses. I would just as soon go with the what we can afford and leave something in the pot that we can talk about the terminal later. So.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Further to Councillor Lemon's motion? Discussion? Councillor McManaman?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a number of comments to make on this. And I think it's important to step back. How did we get here in the first place? Why are we here in the first place? Why are we even talking about transit and saving money? The city is under an incredible financial pressure. We all know that. We deal with it at budget time. It's unfortunate that we're having this discussion in isolation of the 2015 budget, because I think if we were, we'd be having a much different discussion. As you mentioned at the beginning, we used to get $2.3 million from the province. That's down to $900,000. The best case scenario is that we'll only lose probably $300,000 this year. That's probably the best. So it's somewhat ironic we're talking about, with Councillor Lemon's motion, $300,000 increase in transit, when we're also facing a $300,000 decrease from the province. I mean, that's not a question. That will happen. Energy costs are through the roof. We all know that. We're looking at 10% water and sewer rate increases. We just heard from our parks manager last meeting, the emerald ash borer and all the ash trees that are going to be devastating in our town. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, he said, in up to $1 million is actually what he said in costs to deal with that problem. The infrastructure deficit, Councillor Twaddle mentioned it, and when you say infrastructure, everybody, roads, bridges, we need to be putting an additional $2 million every year to keep up with what we've got out there right now. So in 2015, when whoever's sitting around this table, 2015 in February, there was going to be 7-8% tax increase on the table. There's absolutely no question about that. And whoever's sitting here is going to say, oh, that's the public can't take that. Today is the day you're making the decision on the 2015 budget. You can't make it in isolation and just say, well, it's just this much. No, in the bigger picture, we're going to be looking at an enormous tax increase in 2015. So with all of that, council said, you've got to look at every service. We've got to study every service and see if we can find cost savings. And when we looked at transit, I think we discovered a lot. We discovered that and many of us knew this, for many people it was an essential service, that we had to have a viable service for many in the community. You can't let that pass without saying there are many in the community that do not believe that. There are many in the community that we hear all the time that say, cut the transit system, get rid of it, it's not needed. It's important to note that this council, not one member of this council ever said that. This council has unanimously, numerous times said we want to keep a viable transit system. So that's, by saying, anyone here who is saying there needs to be changes to the transit system, you can say that and still support transit. It doesn't mean you hate transit, it doesn't mean you don't think it's important. You're saying we need to make financially responsible decisions. So on one side we've got transit riders and balancing that. The other side we've got these incredible financial pressures, which I just described, that aren't going to go away. They're only going to get worse. Just about every service we've provide has been impacted by these financial pressures, just about every one. Mm-hmm. You all remember the snow removal discussion we've had over the last 2 years. Why did we do that? To try and relieve the taxpayer of some money, or so they could keep some money, keep taxes lower. I said that incorrectly.
That was Freudian.
Grants to the museum, we cut that. You remember how that went? Why did we do that? We don't like museums?
Yep.
Grass cutting in parks, you probably noticed that. There's a lot more naturalization. Hours at the library were cut. We're selling surplus property off. That's not very popular either. Why are we doing all of that? Why are we discussing transit? Because of the intense financial pressure we're under. And you can't just pretend it doesn't exist. Next February, it's going to hit us like a hammer. You can't keep doing things the way we've been doing them and just pretend that everything's fine, because it's not. Now, some people have said, there's been numerous discussions, that we're not listening to the people, that we need to listen to the people. And I couldn't agree more that we need to listen to the people. Couldn't agree more with that. I think every member here would say that. What people are we listening to? We need to listen to everybody in our city. We need to listen to all the taxpayers in our city. That's not saying transit's not important, but there's more to our city than just transit. A lot more. And maybe I'm the only one that gets these calls or talks to these people, that the senior who's worried about staying in their home because their taxes are too high. Maybe I'm the only one that hears that person, or the homeowners around town that all the time say their taxes are too high. The business people, the business community, the business person that's thinking of moving their business out of Owen Sound to a neighboring municipality because they have lower taxes. Apartment owners who, with some of these budget decisions, will be forced to raise rent because the only way they can do it. I'm sure that every member of council hears from those people. So when we say we need to listen to the people, we need to listen to all the people. We started this process to find savings in the transit system and to make it financially sustainable. We must have said that 1,000 times if we said it once. Make it financially sustainable. We cannot, we should not, I will not make a decision today on transit in a vacuum and not realize the financial reality that the pressures that we're facing, and that we will face at budget time. adding $300,000 to the transit budget, and if we do that, another $100,000 to keep the transit terminal, $400,000 each and every year. Over the life of that contract is, I think Councillor Twaddle said, that's $2 to $3 million. Keeping with all the other things I just said. That is, I can't think of the right word for that, but it's certainly not financial reality. And it is not what Owen Sound can afford. So I won't be supporting the motion. I won't be supporting any of these. Well, I guess we'll see what other motions come forward, but you know, this is, we started to try and find savings, and the discussion today is add $300,000 to $400,000 to the budget. I won't support that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Further, Councillor Lemon.
Yes, Your Worship, I'd like to round up. Well, there's some reality checks that need to be done here. To go to the 4 conventional bus system is going to see a, quote, increase of $121,000, which is really interesting because in 2013 we spent $754,217, and if we go to the 4 conventional transit buses, or the smaller buses, it's going to be $10,000 less than it was 2 years ago. So that's not an increase. The increase amount we're talking about to go to the mixed fleet, which I will call it, is $140,000 each year. It's not $200,000 or $300,000. That's a misstatement. And I find it interesting that as we talk about budgets, and I agree, we're in a tough situation. But transit's a core service, period. Some of the other things we do are not core services. They're nice to haves. They're not absolute necessity. For some people in our community, transit is how they get around. If you want to go from the 28th Street West apartment complex to Walmart, you're looking at between a $13 and $15 hit there and the same amount hit back home again if you go by taxi. A lot of people in our community don't have that money and don't have that luxury. And I have to think we have to look at the community. The other thing is the transit is a core service, but there's a social cost in transit. If people can't get to the hospital with their children in a reasonable way, what's going to happen if they have to take a taxi and they can't afford it? As a matter of fact, the taxi price is probably about the same as an ambulance. May make for more business for the paramedics. The other part of this is you have to look at the core values of your community. The councillor has said there are all kinds of people who want to get rid of the transit system. Well, I've had people who say control the costs, and I agree with that. But the biggest factor in controlling the costs is trying to get new income, and that we haven't done. I'll give you an example. We don't have bus stops in places where people want them. We haven't had them for years. We've got a bus stop at 9th Street and 1st Avenue West, where there's a steel post or bar along, where the bus cannot let down the ramp for wheelchairs. We don't have a bus stop at the Bayshore Community Center. We have it a couple blocks away at the Inn on the Bay. Those are things that dissuade people from using the transit system. So you can play all the math games you want. Benjamin Disraeli said there's lies, damn lies, and the greatest lie of all, statistics. And I think we have to be careful of the statistics. Yes, there's going to be a cost, and yes, we're going to have to bite the bullet. Irrespective of the transit system, folks, we're going to have to bite the bullet next year anyway. That's the reality. And also, we get money from the provincial government to operate the transit system through the gas tax. When everybody's been talking about decreased dollars from the province, they're right. But the number Mr. Ritchie used does not include the gas tax. And how much do we get? We get every year for transit from the gas tax now.
Through your worship, approximately 270,000.
270,000. That's a nice chunk of change. And if we don't have a transit system, we'll lose the 270,000 because it's designated. If we work with our neighbors on trying to service outside the community and let them avail themselves of the gas tax, we could increase that indirectly. There are a lot of things we can do. I believe we need a mixed fleet. The problem is, what happens in the middle of winter time if you've got a bus that's at capacity and you go to a bus stop and there are people there who want to get on? Do you leave them there? That's a moral dilemma as well as possibly even what it could do to the people. Anyway, I made the motion for a reason because I believe this is the way we should go, and I will ask for a vote of record because I want this to be a recorded vote. I think it's necessary.
Okay, we have a motion, Councillor Twaddle?
It is disingenuous for anyone to suggest that the decisions we're making here today are about a core service. This council has unanimously, in every discussion, supported the essential value of the transit system. Without hesitation, nobody on this council has been more vigorous than I in defending the transit system. Because as Councillor McManaman said, I have far more people come to me and question why we run transit. Far more. And if I were to make my decision on the basis of how many people spoke to me and on which side of the issue they were on, I wouldn't be here supporting a 4-route system. But I make my decisions on what I believe are the best interests of everybody in the community. The 4-route system that we have in front of us today is, with some improvements, the same system that's been operating for years, serving all of the riders. We're talking about making some changes that are financially responsible to all of the taxpayers in the community, including the users of transit. Because if we make financially irresponsible decisions, then I believe the system is under greater threat. Absolutely, the system will be under greater threat than it is today. Today, you've got 9 members of this council who unanimously support an effective, really the best transit system we can afford. But we have to make responsible financial decisions, or the system will be in jeopardy. I don't say that lightly. I say that in all sincerity. If we don't make some responsible financial decisions, the system will be in jeopardy. My goal throughout this entire 18-month exercise has been to save a transit system that works. I said it at a council meeting when I moved away from my support of the 3-route system. My daughter lived in a community, a suburb of Dallas, Texas, that consciously did not have transit. That's not the kind of community that I want to live in.
Councillor Adair.
I cannot support the mixed bus expense. If we look at the numbers here, by going with the four routes, we go back to where we were last year, before our previous provider said we were going from $750,000 to over $1 million. That's why we ended up, as Councillor McManaman said, to do that. Certainly if we go with a mixed fleet, I absolutely could not support keeping the terminal open. That just can't happen. I'm going to vote against this motion. I would vote in favor of buying 6 the ARBOC buses. And then I will listen to what other councillors have to say, and I know Councillor Purdon will attempt to persuade me that we should keep the terminal open, and I will listen to that after we deal with this issue. But if we go with adding another 100,000 to this and then another 100,000, I'm out at that point. We cannot. Now, I will echo what Councillor McManaman and Councillor Twaddle have said. People say to me all the time, well, just get rid of it. You could actually run in this fall's election on the stand that you are going to eliminate transit, and you would get elected. You would absolutely get elected. You would get elected because you would get rid of transit, and you would have no tax increases for 4 years. Someone could do that.
Yeah, we could.
I have supported transit from the beginning. We are not talking, the ludicrousy of Councillor Lemon's comment that unless you spend more than $750,000 on transit, you don't support transit is so much something, I can't even.
Point of order.
I can't even say.
I rise on the
Sure,
point of order.
absolutely.
I did not make that statement. I asked that it be
You
withdrawn.
continuously make that.
Councillor
I would
Adair,
ask that to be
Councillor Adair,
withdrawn.
Councillor Adair, I will agree with Councillor Lemon. Please keep it gentlemanly. Carry on. Carry on.
The thought that someone is willing to spend $750,000 per annum to have an effective transit system means that they support that transit system. Every member of this council has supported transit. The idea that you don't support transit unless it looks exactly like this is stupid. I do not support the motion that's on the floor. I will listen to what Councillor Purdon has to say to me when we move on to the issue of the transit terminal.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Purdon is next on the list for this discussion.
I've kind of lost the detail of the motion. I would like to hear what the motion actually is with all the rhetoric.
Sure. Madam Clerk, could you repeat the motion, please?
That City Council direct First Student to obtain 2 30-foot Easy Rider Eldorado 2s and 4 ARBOC buses.
Thank you.
Well, there's no reference to the confirmation of the 4 routes service.
It's been done. Did we not?
Have not done
Oh,
that.
no, we haven't. So,
We have not done
So
that.
we're dealing with this.
Only the buses.
That's what the motion
Before we
is.
decide whether we're going to have a 4-route system.
I would table my own motion until we vote on whether we're going to have a 3-route or 4-route system. I thought we had endorsed that, and then I will make a subsequent motion that we have a 4-route system.
I think informally, the 4-route system is very well entrenched. However, formally, I don't believe this council has passed a motion to confirm the 4-route system.
We did.
So,
That was in the minutes of
Yeah.
the Operations Advisory Committee. That was in the minutes of the Operations Advisory Committee that was received but not yet approved. So that's correct. We still need to do that.
yes, the tabling motion's in effect. Somebody want to make a motion on the 4 routes? Councillor Purdon.
That was why I asked for the reading of the motion.
Whoops, we're voting first on the tabling motion. All
okay.
those in favor of tabling Councillor Lemon's motion? Yeah. All those opposed? Councillor Purdon, the motion's tabled.
So I would move a motion to confirm a 4-route service.
Motion is to confirm the 4-route service as presented by the consultant. Okay.
I
Councillor
thought we
Lemon.
passed the motion to accept the consultant's report earlier.
No,
We didn't pass that? I thought there was a motion.
no.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Yeah.
That
Councillor Ray.
motion would include any tweaking that had to occur.
Further discussion? All those,
I might suggest perhaps it would just be cleanest to approve the minutes of the operations, that portion of the minutes from the Operations Advisory Committee, which for the four-route system and the tweaking. That's correct.
That's a friendly amendment? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. Good. Now, to the tabling motion. To the tabled motion from Councillor Lemon. We get that on the table sooner or later.
Well, it's been on the table, I think, it's sort of like used.
Let's call the question.
I was just going to request that the motion be called, and I think it's time to make that decision, and we'll see what happens. And I'm asking for a vote of record.
Councillor Adair. Opposed. Councillor Chamberlain. Opposed. Councillor Lemon.
In favor.
Councillor McManaman.
Opposed.
Councillor Purdon.
Opposed?
Councillor Twaddle.
Opposed?
Councillor Wright.
Opposed.
Mayor Haswell.
Opposed.
Thank you. That motion is defeated with 1 in favor and 7 opposed.
Thank you. Subsequent motion, Councillor Twaddle.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would move that we direct First Student to acquire our 6 ARBOC buses, 4 for conventional transit, 1 spare, and 1 for special transit. And just note that they'll be here twice as fast as the larger buses would have been.
Thank you. Motion's on the floor. Councillor Lemon.
Your Worship, a question, and that is, I'm assuming those buses are going to be blue as our current buses are, or have we discussed, has that been discussed by anybody?
Mr. Tupling.
Your Worship, if I may, to Councillor Lemon, that's one of the details I have been anticipating. They will be similar in color to what's here. That's one of the details that we'll work out through the negotiations and in the revisions to the contract, and we will certainly be presenting that back for Council's consideration at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Purdon.
I am concerned that 2 years down the line, that these buses are too small for our ridership. They might even be, we're already pushing it right now with the ridership we have at certain times. I think they're quite adequate for right now, but that's it. And my vision, and I think probably most people at this table, is that we have many, many more people using transit. And Mr. Tupling was kind of pointing out that there are, no, it was Mr. Fletcher, I think, was pointing out, there's opportunities now for capacity increases at times, but at other times we're really pressured. So I would like to know whether it's possible to have a review. Are we going to be locked in to never ever being able to have a bigger bus ever again? I would like to be able to know that, you know, in a subsequent council, at some point, we may be able to look again with our contractor. Of course, there's always costs involved with things like that. Is that an option for a subsequent council or down the line if more people are using the bus?
Yeah, it's a good question. Either city manager, somebody over there knows the answer to that question.
Thank you, Your Worship. As council will recall, the RFP went out for an 8-year contract. And I think you're getting into an area that would mean arguably that you're going to break the contract. That doesn't mean that we can't have further discussion, but please keep in mind that when you went out to RFP, it was to try and create an even level playing field for all those who submitted proposals.
So it's conceivable that a different bus could be negotiated in at a later date.
You could. That's partially why I have our lawyer sitting here. It does get it a little complicated, but perhaps our solicitor could speak to that as well.
Sure.
Basic principle, Your Worship, would be that 2 parties to an existing contract can amend that contract.
Right.
So, on the other hand, this was done through a competitive process as far as the original contract. So it could conceivably raise issues as far as that's concerned, because commitments were made based on the competitive process.
Sure. Councillor Purdon.
Just for clarification, but you said earlier that with the RFP process, there was no mention of what types of buses, what size of buses. That wasn't part of the RFP process? So if we've made a choice without really considering what size of buses, so why would that be a problem if we wanted to renegotiate with the person we chose when we didn't even talk about size of buses?
And I think I totally agree with the direction that you're headed in terms of, if we get to a point where the capacity, all the buses are beyond capacity, which I hope that is the case, then can we sit down with First Student and talk about a different capacity or size of bus? And what I'm hearing from our solicitor is that if both parties agree to sit down and do that, way in the future, but that's not what we're talking about tonight, way in the future, that is conceivable. That could happen. So I think that for the beginning of the contract that we're entering into with First Student, Council's faced with the decision, has made the decision on the buses and the routes, and we can certainly discuss that going forward. Does that clarify? Okay. Councillor Chamberlain.
Yes, I don't think we voted yet on the buses, but I think we're going to soon. And I do like the idea that we would likely be checking how this goes along the way, whether they are suitable or not. And this might be a time to talk about having a transportation committee to help with that review. That is something we haven't had before. So we did have that. I don't know if that would come up later in another motion, but that is something that would maybe help us with following that part through.
And I think that would be a separate motion,
Okay.
that we would not muddy the waters,
All right, let's do
but
the
I
buses.
just am suggesting that. So further discussion to the motion. Reminder of the motion for council, please.
That City Council direct First Student to purchase 6 RBOC buses on behalf of the city.
Your Worship, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Thank you. A re-recorded vote, please. Go ahead.
Councillor Adair.
In favor?
Councillor Chamberlain. In favor. Councillor Lemon.
Opposed.
Councillor McManaman.
In favor.
Councillor Purdon. In favor. Councillor Twaddle.
In favor?
Councillor Wright. In favor. Mayor Haswell.
In favor.
Thank you. That motion passes with 7 in favor and 1 opposed.
Thank you. Okay, we are now at the item that we have in front of us. We have a couple of just really housekeeping items in terms of the 5A, number 1 and 2. 5A and B, they're calling it on this page. And there's some excerpts from sort of preambles that Mr. Tupling referred to throughout his report. Councillor Lemon.
Your Worship, I have one question, and that pertains to the existing buses. I was on the buses a couple of days ago. The air conditioning was not working on the bus. Apparently, the air conditioning has not been working on 3 of the buses. The temperature was 107 degrees.
Excuse me, Councillor Lemon.
I'm just,
Actually, if you hold that thought, just don't let that thought go. But procedurally, I really want to clean up these 2 pieces, but don't let that thought go.
well, we're going to be
And we'll
quite
have
a while on
long-
those 2 pieces.
We will have a long while to discuss them, a long while. So, on item number 5A1, what is council's, that was moved by you, Councillor Lemon, at the Operations Advisory Committee. Basically, it's a motion that is here for information. It's not, yes.
That's how we just do it.
It's my belief that
Yeah.
through the motion of Councillor Purdon with respect to the confirmation that we have effectively dealt with this item.
Okay, I can stroke that off my list, thank you. And the second item is the buses. And that might take a little bit more discussion, but it was a deferral, a motion to defer. We've looked after it now. It's basically a motion to receive. I don't know how there could be a lot of debate on that. Thank you. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Okay, Councillor Lemon, back to you.
Your Worship, I have a concern that the air conditioning on 3 of the buses was not working. Under the terms of the contract, I believe the air conditioning should be working. And as I said, the temperature was 107 degrees on the bus that I was on, and people were very, very uncomfortable. The other thing which concerns me, if it gets too hot in the buses, the stress on the driver could be critical. And I am hoping that we are going to see those kinds of repairs continue on these buses, which I understand under the contract is required.
Mr. Tupling.
Your worship, if I may, Jane McIver is here from First Student. She's the manager, and I did indeed speak to her on this matter, and I'll just let her advise you what has transpired, if she may, please.
Jane, if you could just come up to the podium, there's a microphone there. If you push it, it's easier for people to hear. Thank you.
Okay. We did have Thermal King in today. We had asked Thermal King to come in before. They're the contractor that has repaired them in past for the other operators. So they came in today. They have repaired 2 of the units that were not working. The third one that was not working is in need of parts that they have to order. They're hoping those parts are here either tomorrow or Monday, so that'll be repaired then. Thank you. Okay?
These poor old buses are really, they're being held together with a hope and a prayer. Further discussion, Councillor Lemon? No. Questions or anything? No? Anyone else? Any other member of council? Oh, Councillor McManaman.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd move the approval of the conceptual design of the proposed bus shelter at the proposed transfer point at 3rd Avenue East north of 8th Street.
Motion's on the floor. Discussion. Councillor Lemon.
Well, Your Worship, we have not explored adaptive reuse of the existing terminal. The current, right now, the cost is $90,000 to $100,000, the way we've been operating it. But a huge amount of this cost under this could disappear. And to me, it would be premature at this point to not look at adaptive reuse of it as a terminal and as some other function as well. I gave you an example of the DIA looking, renewing their lease being up, and other people have shown interest in it. This is one of those decisions which normally I like reasonably speedy decisions, but in this case, I think it would be premature to all of a sudden decide to spend a whole bunch of money and take away parking if we could use adaptive reuse to our advantage. Under that, we would not have any staff position, and I would ask the Director of Finance, of the $100,000 or $90,000 budget for the terminal, how much of that was salaries, roughly?
Through you, Your Worship, it's difficult to say. Previously, the salaries, the running of the terminal was also included in the contract price. So those employees there previously worked for the contractor. I'm perhaps not privy what our costs are at the moment. You think it'd be $73,000 for the year? Mr. Tupling predicts it would be in the neighborhood of $70,000 a year to staff that facility.
Okay, so if we do not have a staffing cost, we are going to have some stone removal costs, which we're going to have in the other case as well. And we tax ourselves on that, but that could well be covered off in the lease. I know what, for instance, the DIA is paying a year in lease, and that's quite a bit of money. It works out to, I don't know whether that's public or not, but anyway, I think we should be looking at adaptive reuse first, and I also believe that that is a question that is really, we're not going to be able to do anything till effectively the new council is in place, and I'm thinking that's when the decision should be made on the terminal, not now.
Okay, so that's in speaking to Councillor McManaman's motion. Anyone else like to speak to that motion that's on the floor? Councillor Twaddle.
Well, I would point out, Your Worship, that the decision regarding the terminal was made, I'm not sure just when, but quite a few months ago. And in approving the minutes of the Operations Advisory Committee and the recommendation that was before us again tonight, we have already approved the common transfer point when we approved the 4 routes, that motion that just occurred. So that reconfirmed the motion of council from last, I believe it was last November, but I stand to be corrected on the date. But anyway, we have, the routes that were recommended were with the common transfer point. We just approved that. The decision of council, I forget the date, but I think it was last November, or in that time period, was that we go forward without the use of the transfer terminal.
I'm going to go to the city clerk in terms of procedurally. Can you help us out here?
I believe that what Councillor Twaddle has said has merit, that the 4-route system that was put forward at the Operations Advisory Committee and again this evening that was voted on was specifically set up for a transfer point north of 8th Street on 3rd Avenue East. So what the motion is right now is the conceptual design of that proposed bus shelter at that proposed site.
Point of order.
Councillor Lemon.
I'm rising in point of order. When we were having the discussion earlier tonight, one of the things that was pointed out was that we were talking about the conceptualization of the routes, but not necessarily, because the question was asked, does that mean you couldn't use the terminal? And the answer was so are we getting blindsided here?
I think there's Councillor Lemon, I agree with you. I think that there is a fine line between, I think we're procedurally going to get all tied up in knots here. And, well, I certainly...
Motion to reconsider.
Yeah, a motion to reconsider, that would follow as after the motion that's currently on the floor has been voted on. And that would untangle any perceived procedural tangle we might be in. So to the motion on the floor, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I will
Thank
not
you.
support the motion on the floor for many reasons, but basically, I don't think that 3rd Avenue location is safe. I don't like to see buses going through a parking lot where there are people getting in and out of vehicles, coming from shopping and getting into their vehicles. It has buses going in and buses coming around and parking on the street. I don't agree with that. I think it's totally unsafe. It's right across from a senior's home, and I just live down the street, and I drive up that street many times, and I'm always stopping for somebody that's going across that street with a walker. And I just cannot see buses going there. The other thing I need to raise at this time is that we really need to look at the future here. It's been mentioned by Councillor Purdon, and I totally agree with her. We're looking at an expanded Georgian College. We at the county are looking at a transit system county-wide. It's not going to happen for a while, but it will sometime in the future. The social services up there are looking at a county-wide system right now. They have a consultant in there, Mr. Yu. He is looking at providing the transportation. Right now they're using taxi cabs, vans, SMART, and a number of other vehicles to bring people into the city. The Amish and the Mennonite bring buses up here every week to shop. These people won't have any place to go to use a washroom if we don't have a terminal, which they are using now. I think there could have been a better decision. I would have liked to have seen it used, the City Hall used as a terminal, like they do in Stratford. And by the way, Councillor Lemon is right, the DIA in Stratford looks after the busing, and you can get all the busing information there. They're right across from the terminal, and I walked in there and got the routes and all kinds of things, and it worked out great. So I think there are things that we can do. I can't see spending $93,000 to tear up a parking lot that we just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on repairing. That to me is inane, quite frankly. And we are not thinking of the subdivisions that are going in. I am looking at 5 routes in this city eventually, not too far down the road. I can see us with an expansion. We're looking for expanding our city, not for bringing it in, but for expanding it. What we need to do, and I totally agree with my fellow councillors who are talking about the concern we have with our finances, we need revenue in the city is what we have. We need to make it easier for people to come in, to put their businesses and their homes in the city than we are doing right now. So there are things that we can do, but closing the bus station to me is not the way to go at this time. And I asked, with all due respect, I asked the question when the motion was put forth about the bus routes, if they could be tweaked. And the answer I was given was yes, they could.
Yep.
And I believe in the motion it says north of 8th Street. Well, the terminal is north of 8th Street. So as far as I'm concerned, we're still okay with that.
Yeah. Councillor Adair.
Your Worship, procedurally, I really think we need to deal with the terminal issue first, and then perhaps Councillor McManaman's motion, and I would move that we table Councillor McManaman's motion until this council tonight makes a final decision on the fate of the terminal.
Okay, the motion is to table the motion from Councillor McManaman, Councillor Lemon, to the tabling.
I'm assuming the Councillor there, I was just ready to vote on the motion to table.
Okay, motion to table for, until after the next imaginary motion's coming forward, okay.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Here, we're, all those in favor? Whew. Opposed? That motion's carried. Oh, Councillor Lemon.
Funny you should mention that, I might just have a motion. I would ask that staff look at alternative and adaptive reuse of the transit terminal, which would allow its use as a bus terminal, but other purposes as well, as a measure to reduce the cost of the transit system or contain the cost of the transit system and provide a good service level. And in making that motion, I note the only public washrooms in the downtown are in two locations, one, City Hall, and two, the terminal. So the north end of the downtown has no public washrooms that someone can go in off the street to use. Yes, they can go to a restaurant, but some restaurants really don't like people coming in and using the washrooms if people are not going in there to eat. There are a lot of other good reasons for this, and I think this is an opportunity, and so I would like a staff report at the next meeting of council on how we would request for proposals for alternate use of the said terminal. That is my motion. That effectively keeps it, because we're asking for a report on how we can get adaptive reuse of it. And I'll include in that we continue to use and maintain the terminal until such time as we have exhausted the possibility of adaptive reuse. In other words, let's see if there's something that can go in there. I think there is, and I'll certainly work to find, as a lot of people will, to find something. But this idea of getting rid of the terminal and then all of a sudden deciding that maybe the system we've got doesn't work, which is basically what happened with the three-route system.
City Manager.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Staff are certainly happy to look at that, but I would be remiss in suggesting that I won't have a comprehensive enough report in less than a month's time to really answer the questions that council may have. I would suggest one possibility to council, that this is one decision that isn't necessarily tied to the contract, and that you could deal with this on a year-to-year basis. So that's one suggestion, that you could see if you're going to be successful in getting someone in there, and give yourselves a year and deal with it at subsequent budgets if it's not successful. So I'll simply throw that out on the table for your thought and consideration.
Thank you for the
I thi-
comments, Councillor Lemon.
I think that approach, because once we get somebody in there, they're going to want to lease it for 4 or 5 years, which is going to assure us of that. So I would adjust my motion that we continue to use the transit terminal for 1 year while we seek adaptive reuse of the building and those options. And that gives us a bit of time to do it, because obviously we're not going to have something in place for the 25th of August.
Councillor Lemon, I have a suggestion, only a
Okay.
suggestion. If you were to separate those two out, I believe it would be, each would have much more impact.
All right, I will make a motion that we continue to use the transit terminal for the next year.
All those, or discussion to that. Councillor Adair?
Well, and Mr. Ritchie can jump up at any time. No, not jump off, jump up. I might suggest, and I will give full credit to Councillor Purdon, we do have, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of it, but we do have a capital budget. If we're talking about a 1-year reprieve, and I know there's a second motion coming, to find some tenant, someone who will take this $90,000 cost and collapse it down. We have a year that we use the Transit Capital Reserve money to continue to operate that terminal for the next year in order that it does not have an impact, a negative impact on the budget. At the end of the year, the next council, if they decide, you know what, because of everything that Councilor McManaman said, and everything he said is correct, that they need to close the terminal, the sale of that terminal goes back into the capital, the Transit Capital Reserve. So in fact, we still end up with the same amount of money in that reserve. What we've done is we've bought a year's time. What we've done is put some stability into the system. We have the new routes in place. The new buses will have arrived by then. And we can let the system kind of shake itself out over the next year and see where we are. I don't know if Councillor Lemon would accept that as a friendly motion, but at this point, I don't know where the 90,000 would come from until such time as we.
I certainly accept that as a friendly amendment and the intent that was there, because it's going to achieve the end goal, and I agree that taking the funds out of the transit reserve, and if we find in a year we can't get anybody in there, and which is a possibility. I mean, I'm being very real when I say that. I think that putting the money back in again would replenish that reserve. To me, getting rid of the terminal is a huge, huge decision with massive impact on the downtown. And I think this is the way to go, and I accept that as a friendly amendment. And I would ask that the motion be put.
Motion is going to be put. I'll call the question.
I want to know what the question is.
Okay, we can clarify the question, absolutely. Or we can clarify the motion.
The motion is that we continue to operate the transit terminal for 1 year, using the funding required from the transit reserves. And at the end of that time, if we decide that we do not need the terminal, that the revenue from the sale of the terminal would be used to replenish the transit reserve fund.
Councillor Twaddle,
Okay,
thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. I think that the motion needs to have a trigger in it in order to establish the point at which council would make a further determination. And I think we need to be specific about the dates. So the date could be that we continue to operate the transit terminal until August the 1st, 2015, or it could be September the 1st, 2015, and that if no adaptive reuse has been established by a certain date, that then council would then begin the process. And I would suggest that the date that would trigger the process to close the terminal on August the 1st or September the 1st should be budget 2015, which would be February, potentially March, or, you know, or it could be outside of budget. It could be May the 1st or June the 1st. But I just think that because the only way things come back to us is if we have a motion saying this has got to come back to us at a certain point, we need to include that.
I would accept that as a friendly amendment to include the trigger date, as you call it, of June the 1st, 2015, because that would still give adequate time if, we'll know by that time, and I think it will work, but that would also give them the adequate time for the construction next year.
Okay. And that's fair. Just one other point. When Councillor Lemon talks about adaptive reuse, one potential is that we sell the terminal and lease back enough space for ticket sales and washrooms. We don't need the entire terminal necessarily, the entire space. But in order to sell it, we would need to go through the whole process of declaring it surplus.
That's right.
So that's still before council. That doesn't necessarily have to come forward. But it may be that there's someone out there, Councillor Lemon, who would like to buy the building and use part of it and lease part of it back to the city. And I think that we just need to understand and be open to that possibility.
I recognize we don't know what we're going to find out there in the market, and we'll have to adjust to it as moving forward.
So if the declaring the building surplus were to come forward at a subsequent council meeting, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to sell it. It only means that detail would have been looked after if somebody were to make an offer.
I would say it would be premature to bring forth declaring it surplus until such time as we've given an opportunity to the marketplace to see what's out there.
Well,
I don't want to do that until we know where, if there's anything, we'll know within the next couple months whether or not we're going to be able to
Yeah,
lease.
and I wasn't trying to include that in the motion. I was simply making clear that that's a procedural step that's not a final decision.
And on that note, we'll go to our solicitor.
I just wanted to remind council that whereas you're well within your rights to require that something be brought forward to another council at a specific point in time, you're not in a position to predetermine what that council might do at that time.
All right, further discussion to the motion. Do we all know what the motion is? We're all clear? Councillor McManaman? Absolutely. Madam Clerk?
May I read out the motion to make sure?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course.
It's not pretty.
No, sure.
That City Council continue to operate the transit terminal for 1 year using funding for the terminal, from the transit reserve, after which, if Council determines not to continue to use the terminal, the proceeds of sale of the terminal would be used to replenish the reserve funds used for the operation of the transit terminal during the year. And further, that Council decides whether to continue to use and own the terminal on or before June 1st, 2015.
One word that's not in there is up to a year. Because if we lease it out, we're not going to be operating.
Up to a year. Okay,
I'm being optimistic.
there we go. Madam Clerk, could you call the question, please?
Councillor Adair.
In favor?
Councillor Chamberlain. Councillor Lemon.
In favor.
Councillor McManaman.
Opposed?
Councillor Purdon. In favor. Councillor Twaddle.
In favor?
Councillor Wright.
In favor.
Mayor Haswell.
In favor.
Thank you. That motion passes with 7 in favor and 1 opposed.
Thank you, and thank you, council. That was some, yes. Councillor Lemon, did you have a subsequent motion? No, it was Councillor McManaman's, the tabling motion. Tabled,
point of
yes.
order. At this point, we're going to keep the terminal open, but we haven't directed staff
That is
to
the
find an
subsequent.
alternative use. I believe Councillor Lemon had a, but I'll make it if he would like, you know.
Yeah, no,
Mr.
that
Lawler
was
to
the
do that.
intent, it was to
Thank you.
follow up with that.
Yes.
A motion that we seek possible tenants of the transit terminal.
There we go. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. Back to the tabled motion from Councillor McManaman. Would you like to withdraw that, or would you like to? Yeah, it's been moved, so we need to vote.
No, but it's moved.
It is moved. Just withdraw. We don't. It's in procedural no man's land, so you can withdraw it, or you can ask us to vote on it. Okay. Okay. That motion has been withdrawn. Thank you. No, we need to receive Mr. Fletcher's deputation. Councillor Twaddle.
Yeah, I would move that we receive the Steer Davis Gleave presentation, and I don't think we received
No, we didn't.
and also Mr. Tupling's report.
Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. We're complete with the business in front of us. I need a motion that the committee
The committee rise.
shouldn't take a holiday. 2 weeks.
You know, the last time
Yeah.
nobody moved it, nobody knew what to do.
All those in favor? Opposed? That motion's carried. We're now in formal session. If I could ask members of the public to just please keep it down to a dull roar. Resolution adopting proceedings in committee of the whole, please.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Chamberlain that the actions taken in committee of the whole in considering a deputation, minutes, and a report be confirmed by this council.
Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. Bylaws, please.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Chamberlain that bylaws number 2014-132 be passed and enacted.
All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. And we're now adjourned. Have a good evening.